Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to show you 10 covers that were actually banned back when these albums were originally released. Now, I want to focus on more mainstream records because owning a record store, I've seen a lot of album covers. And when you get into the punk and metal genre, you're going to see some pretty gruesome and grotesque stuff that by any mainstream standard would be banned, but they're more indie boutique type of albums. I wanted to focus on albums that were very mainstream, records that you've listened to 1,000 times that have had their artwork changed over the years. Sometimes the cover gets banned, sometimes the cover comes back. But I want to start with a very iconic record. I think Rolling Stone rated this as one of the 10 greatest records of all time, and it is up there. That is The Velvet Underground and Nico. Now, this doesn't necessarily have a band cover, but this actually has a band back cover. If you look at the back, you actually can see Eric Emerson was being projected by the band on the wall behind, and he actually was pretty hard up for cash back at this particular time and threatened to sue the band for the unauthorized use of his image. MGM didn't want to pay. I wonder how much it would have been. I don't really know. But I don't think it could have been too much. But rather than paying, they actually just decided to airbrush him out. And if you look at later covers, you will actually see that he's just completely missing. There are both of them side by side. Now, there was a subsequent, like a middle pressing, where rather than destroying the covers that they had in production already, they just put a sticker over the image while the airbrushing took place. And then the third cover I just showed you didn't have the image at all. Now, real clean copies with the Emerson photograph in the back. I've seen sealed copies, clean copies. We're talking a multi-$1,000 record. I've seen sealed copies go for well over $10,000 on multiple occasions. It really is a very desirable and iconic record. One of the most expensive on this list of original artworks pre-censoring/banning. Up next is an album that came out in 1974 that caused somewhat of an uproar, and that is Roxy Music's Country Life, and you can kind of see why. You've got two lingerie-cladded supermodels just hanging out here in front of this bush. They're in kind of see-through lingerie, you know, not quite Bianca Sensori see-through lingerie, but you could see they're in see-through lingerie. We had a little bit of nipples that were showing, and a little bush, which, I don't know, maybe ironically made a little sense because they're standing in front of a bush. But the album, I of course here had to censor it just because YouTube would not, even to this day, appreciate me showing this. But the album was actually censored somewhat after its initial release. And what they showed on the censored copies was essentially this back cover. So the back cover became the front cover, and rather than the text you see here, it just said Roxy Music. And in the United States, that lasted for some time. Now, it's a cover that they actually brought back quite a few years ago, so a lot of people might not even realize that that censored cover exists. I actually find the censored cover much more difficult to find than the actual band cover, but it is out there. But I think it's kind of the bulk of the sales when the album were new came from the original cover. And then as the album kind of went into catalog sales, it got the censored cover. And kind of with the resurgence of vinyl, they brought back the original cover. But it is, again, something that was banned back in the day. This next album is actually one of the most desirable band cover arts of all time. So when this album originally came out in 1968, Jimi Hendrix contacted Reprise and he kind of told them what he had envisioned for the artwork of the album. Jimi actually wanted a photo by Linda Eastman, Paul McCartney's future wife, of the Alice in Wonderland statue in Central Park with a bunch of kids kind of hanging out around it. Reprise clearly didn't like the idea because in the United States, we got this cover, which was essentially a headshot of him at the Saville Theater, but it's all, the colors kind of futzed with. It's like this reddish yellow cover. And maybe by today's standards, you've seen this album so many times that it kind of has an iconic look to it at this point. Although I think it's somewhat of a lame cover. But in the United Kingdom, Track had other ideas. And they actually gave us this artwork. This is a photograph by David Montgomery that just has a bunch of naked ladies spread throughout the front and the back of the cover. At the time, apparently Jimi Hendrix hated this cover, although he later came out and said he didn't mind it. But he was furious to this cover. And although this artwork has come out in the United Kingdom, Japan, other parts of the world, it has never been officially released in the United States on vinyl. Now, recently, they actually issued an Electric Ladyland box set with the intended artwork. And there it is. Now, this is actually a great box set on a side note. It's all analog, cut from the original master tapes. Comes with a bunch of alternate cuts. Comes with a live at the Hollywood Bowl concert. Great box set, but this is the original artwork as intended. Now, this next album caused a huge uproar when it was released in 1969, featuring a 11-year-old girl, nude, holding this airliner-type object in her hand. Now, this album is actually something that causes uproar, and I've had interactions at the store from customers because of this artwork today. Now, in the United States, they actually changed the artwork to the back cover, which is essentially just the band hanging out, doing a photo shoot. But in most of the world, and even later on in the United States, we got this photograph. Now, the photograph was done by a friend of Clapton's, and it actually originally he approached a 14-year-old girl, and they deemed that she was a little bit too old to photograph. I'm glad they did that. That would be... I've always looked at this particular piece of artwork as artwork. 14-year-olds, that would have been bad. But they realized that that was bad at the time, and they actually got the sister of the girl they originally approached to do the photo shoot. It's an iconic image. I've had people yell at me in the store to this day, and not just on this record, it happens on multiple occasions, on multiple records. But this is one that to this day stirs up a lot of controversy. But again, I look to view this as art. It's an iconic piece of art. YouTube would probably not be so kind. So once again, I have censored out this art. Also a fantastic album. But yeah, the subsequent releases of this got this relatively lame back cover photograph repurposed as the front photograph. Now, this next record is actually a personal grail of mine. I've been looking for the uncensored version of this record my entire life. They do come up for sale every now and then. I put aggressive bids in to own one of these records. I think the last one went for well over $10,000. That is David Bowie's 1974 album, Diamond Dogs. Now, the original cover of this was actually airbrushed out for the mainstream release, but there are copies of it that were put into circulation of the unedited version of the record. This is a pretty mundane alteration, you know, even by probably the standards back then. The original artwork actually featured David Bowie as a male dog, and he had male parts. And that was airbrushed out, and then the album cover itself was changed a little bit. Where it says Bowie, it actually originally said Alive. But there are uncensored versions of this cover out there, and they go for, like I said, an absolute fortune. You don't need to look for male parts to find out if you have a censored cover. Just look at the top where it says Bowie. If it says Alive, you've hit the jackpot. And you can feel free to contact me at theingroove.com, where I would love to be able to make a purchase of this from you. It is, again, a grail for a lot of collectors out there. Yeah, it's also an artwork that's never really been restored to David Bowie's original intent, at least not on vinyl anyways. But definitely a personal grail of mine, an iconic and a very high dollar record. This next album was actually released in its intended form, but was shortly censored because of the image. That is Roger Waters' The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Now, the original artwork actually features a softcore porn artist looking the opposite way, and you can fully see her exposed rear end. That is Lindsay Drew. So this is the original artwork, the uncensored artwork, the way you see it as it came out back in the day. This was actually only somewhat changed to its much more lame image that you see here, which was nothing more than the same artwork with this goofy black box on it. Yeah, this is an album again that hasn't been reissued on vinyl, so we haven't seen the original artwork restored. I feel like if it was to come out today, it would be restored. But a lot of Roger Waters' solo projects haven't been reissued. Radio Chaos needs a reproduction, and The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Amused to Death got reissued, but yeah, these other two great Roger Waters records are missing. Hopefully, again, with the original artwork as intended. Now, this next album was actually released with the censored artwork, but they made mention of the fact that the artwork was censored, and it included the uncensored artwork on the inside of the gatefold. That is the electric spanking of War Babies. Right on the front. Oh, look. The cover that they were too scared to print. Peek here. But yeah, this is the artwork that they were too scared to print. Essentially, it is a cartoonish naked lady from the backside in kind of like a phallus-shaped spaceship with some boob top end going on there. But yeah, you could see this was something that was a no-go. Now, they actually did restore this artwork on some 90s pressings to where they included the censored artwork on the front, and the uncensored artwork, I believe, was actually tucked away on the inside. Now, this next album artwork would have never even been something that was even remotely controversial had not the events that subsequently followed ever taken place. That is Lynyrd Skynyrd's Street Survivors. So about a week after this album was released, of course, tragedy struck. A lot of the members of the band died in a plane crash. And I guess it was just automatically assumed that it was a big fiery ball of death, right, of a plane crash. So this image was then looked at as poor taste. So essentially what they did for this particular cover is they went back and they airbrushed out all of the flames. And you essentially just had the band on a black background. Now, this is actually relatively common to find the uncensored version because it was out for a little bit of time before it was corrected. This is an album that also kind of has a mystique and a prestige to finding the original flame cover, but it is not that rare. It is actually very common. I do still get people that come in with them from time to time and think they have a multi-$1,000 record. That is not the case. This is a 2-digit record, and only if it's clean, because it is very common and it is out there quite a bit. Although the censored cover is actually very difficult to find. Not worth much, but I find more of the flame covers than I actually do of the censored cover. Very similar to the Roxy music, to where all the hype, all the hysteria was people going out back in the day trying to find the original flame covers. There wasn't a lot of love for the censored cover. So there just wasn't that many of them made. But yeah, musically a fantastic record, and a record, again, that they've gone back, they've restored the artwork. A lot of time has passed. And yeah, it's the artwork the way the album was originally intended, which is the way the artwork should be on the cover. Up next is actually one of the goofiest artworks to ever be censored. And it's just it's so laughable by today's standards that this even was a thing, but it was. And that is The Mamas and the Papas, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears. Great classic record, California Dreaming, iconic song, iconic record. Now, if you're looking at this record and thinking to yourself, well, what the hell is censored on that? Well, it's actually the toilet bowl, as you see here. They actually didn't want to show a toilet bowl on the cover of a record. It was considered in poor taste. So it actually, they put this little blurb that says includes California Dreaming. But the original cover, which was released, it is extremely rare. Now, this is a very difficult record to find. This is up there with the most difficult censored covers you're ever going to find. Although it doesn't carry the huge premium that some records do, it is a very difficult record to find. But yeah, by today's standards, like the very thought of a toilet bowl causing such outrage that they had to censor it from the album. But that's what it is. A record that we need to get a repress with the toilet bowl in there. I think it has been done in the past. I think Sundays might have did a repress with the toilet bowl on, but that's just going from memory. But the most benign thing by today's standards you can possibly imagine, nobody would ever look at that and think, we got to get this toilet bowl out of here. But if you have a copy with the toilet bowl cover on it, clean copies are $500, $600, $700 records. If it was a band like the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, and it was in the rarity that is, it would be a $10,000 record. But it's the Mamas and the Papas. It's not a very heavily collected band, and subsequently carries a much lighter price tag, although still pretty good at $500, $600, $700 in that range. Now, this next album was one that I looked for quite a while. I'm not a huge fan of the music, but the story is gold. I love the story and I love the photograph so much that it's something that I've always wanted in my collection. And that is Tad's 8-Way Santa. Now, this artwork was actually something that was just found at a thrift store in a pocket of a coat. The band saw the photograph. They thought it was funny, which I do too. It's just great. It's just great 70s Polaroid humor. And they put it on the album. But the original couple on the record saw the album when it came out and sued the band. I guess they were born-again Christians or they found God, and they just really didn't like the way that they were being portrayed in that particular image. And the album art was pulled and it was replaced with something that is pretty lame. It's just a band standing there. Nowhere near as great as that original artwork. I don't think we're ever going to see a reissue of that album artwork. Again, I don't see the band trying to approach the original people on the cover, paying a bunch of money. It's not an artwork that, is that important, I guess, to where you would come up with that kind of money. And I don't think they would sell that many albums to be able to come up with the money to pay the people. I know I'm getting off on a tangent here, but hilarious. It's just a hilarious image. Okay, now this next one is without a doubt the most famous band cover of all time. If you guys have watched this list, you're probably wondering, where the hell is the Beatles Yesterday and Today? Well, I wanted to save it a little bit for the end. But it is not only the most iconic band cover, it is the most iconic album artwork of all time. If you are not into records, you do not care about records, you do not care about albums, you do not care about album art, there is a good chance that you are still familiar with the Beatles Yesterday and Today butcher cover. So what we have here is an original second state cover. I don't have a first state cover in my collection to show you, but I'll put one up on the screen. What I'm showing you on the screen is the way that the band originally intended the album to look. Now you can see why that kind of caused some some shockwaves, because the wholesome Fab Four are dressed up with decapitated babies, chunks of meat, and butcher smocks on the cover of the album. And that's not something that was really, looked upon when it came to the Fab Four. They were nice, good, well-mannered, jovial boys, and that was not the image that people were associating with them at the time. Now, this album was actually released for one day before it was recalled with this butcher smock cover. And also sent out to DJs. So if you were a radio DJ at the time, you would have possibly been sent the first state butcher cover. If you were, I believe Sears, from what I've heard, is the only place that actually floored this album. If you were shopping at Sears back in 1966, you also would have had a chance to buy this album. But subsequently, it was recalled because there was outrage, not only from record retailers, but I think all the people within the inner circle kind of thought that this might have been a bad move for the band. So this was pulled. What they did is they took an alternate photo from that session, which was the trunk cover, and they actually smacked it over the original cover. There are a huge quantity, probably hundreds of thousands of these, where they actually just took the artwork and put the new cover on top of it. You can tell if you have a butcher by looking over here at the white. If you look over here at the white, you will actually see a black V shape, and that is actually Ringo's shirt from the subsequent photo shoot. But it's clearly visible in white. So this would be referred to as a second state. The first state was the original album as intended. The second state was the paste over. The third state is where you essentially pay somebody to remove it, revealing the original cover, but it can never be a first state because one of the things they did after they applied that cover is they trimmed the cover to kind of get rid of the excess sticker on this particular side. So the only way to get a true first state is the unattached, untrimmed cover. But The fourth state, as it's known to become, is just the subsequent album art the way it has always come out since. This is an album that I've been calling for them to release for some sort of promotional reason or another, maybe record store day, for a lot of years. It is the album that everybody would buy. If this was a record store day release, this could be a 500,000 seller. Up next, we have an iconic album whose artwork was actually censored very shortly after its release, and you can kind of see why. We've got Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. It kind of has this cartoonish robot who has assaulted this woman here on the bottom. I've taped her out just so we don't anger the YouTube censors. But shortly after this release, there was some outrage, and we subsequently got the cover you guys are probably more familiar with today. The cross with the band members' heads. You can kind of see why this was banned back in the day, but this was stuff that, this wasn't the first time an album art of Guns N' Roses would be banned. It happened again with a little tagline on a future album talking about the beating of women. So that is just text, where this was kind of more of a graphic image. So you can kind of see why this was banned. They have reissued this artwork recently. I think they did a limited production, 3,000 copies with the band artwork. But I'm going to guess that artwork is going to start to make a comeback. If they were okay putting it on a cover recently, it's probably something that, who knows, maybe we'll see as the restored artwork to this album. I actually think this, at this point, is a more iconic image. It's the album art that most people are used to. It just has the look of what you kind of expect at this point. I don't know, my brain kind of gravitates towards this image as opposed to this one, but it can only be original once, and here you have the original, unedited, uncensored Appetite for Destruction album art. Now, this next album is actually musically, I think, one of the best albums on this entire list, and that is the Rolling Stones' Some Girls. This is the way it was originally released, with the uncensored faces of Marilyn Monroe, Raquel Welch, Lucille Ball, Farrah Fawcett, Judy Garland. But all of those people, I think it was actually Liza Minnelli, her daughter, suing on behalf of Judy Garland, but they actually threatened to sue. So what they did subsequently is they just decided, okay, no problem, and they just blocked off all of that artwork. The thing is, the album just doesn't have the same look when you go ahead and block out all the artwork. I personally don't even have one of those in my collection because they're lame. So what I've done is put a photograph of the censored artwork on the screen. But yeah, musically, one of the best albums on this list, although I would say Electric Ladyland's up there, Velvet Underground's up there. There are some good Blind Faith is good, but musically, what a great record Some Girls is, and what great artwork it is. And it's pretty mundane, but they should have probably got clearances to use those photographs. They probably could have got clearances for some of them. If not, they could have subsequently changed it around. Very similar to what the Beatles did for Sgt. Pepper. They got a lot of permission from the people featured on that cover. And the people they didn't think they could get permission from, they took out of the cover. The Rolling Stones did not do that here, and subsequently we've got the lame censored artwork that carries on till today. All right, guys, tell me what you think of this list below. Again, if I missed anything, give me your comments below. There's other things I left off of this list. Some stuff that was just, I didn't even want to get in the conversation of talking about on a video on YouTube. For instance, the Scorpions' Virgin Killer. I didn't even feel comfortable showing that on camera. There are things, like I said, that were left off of this list, but I think these are some of the most iconic band covers, censored covers of all time. Tell me, guys, what you think.